Hello there, this is Frodo in Florida, and I hope you are doing well. Welcome to Stray Dog Footy, an American podcast on Australian rules football. Looks like we finally have a date for the AFL to resume. In fact, at the time of recording this, players should have already been able to return to some form of practice, and with full contact set to begin in a few days. What teams will be playing when exactly is still being worked out, but mark your calendars for Thursday, June 11th for the first match of Round 2 of Season 2020. I am very excited by this, but I'm also checking my enthusiasm with the knowledge that it will be without crowds so that the raw energy that the AFL footy brings will be somewhat lessened. Also, I'm assuming they are continuing with these short 15-minute quarters, which I absolutely hate, but understand the need for this year if they're going to play a lot of games close together to make up for lost time. But still, there may yet be footy soon. Awesomeness. So far, the perpetual grief of not being able to actually watch any new footy has been eased somewhat by the Barkley Street podcast, at least for me anyway. Listening to Bob and Bont is a lot of fun, and they, along with their guests, do a great job of mixing entertainment with education of all things Western Bulldogs, and footy in general. Definitely check them out if you haven't. Speaking of podcasts, there are so many cropping up these days, just like this little one I'm doing here now. Some of them are actually pretty good even. With everyone shut off from each other, it seems many people are embracing this as a new way of communicating. To say I was shocked and flattered to have my question picked and answered on the Drill Hall's first episode is a major understatement. And to hear that both President Peter Gordon and CEO Amit Bains of the Western Bulldogs actually know who I am is just mind-boggling to me. But I was equally impressed that these lofty individuals would take the time to reassure us fans and members by explaining how the club is dealing with the harsh realities of this COVID situation. I genuinely felt a great sense of relief after listening to the podcast, and during these difficult times, that is a rare treasure indeed. I am eagerly awaiting the next episode, be it during COVID times or after some normalcy has been restored. Now, a great show that has been around for a bit, but that I have just started listening to, is the Kick to Kick podcast. Featuring 3 Aussie AFL fans, they are working their way through VFL/AFL history, one season at a time. If you are curious just how we got where we are today, give these guys a listen. Of course, if you want more American perspectives on Australian rules football, as always, I suggest you check out both the AFL Obsessed and the Yank on the Footy podcasts. In fact, Peter Gordon himself said that he had heard my interview on a Yank on the Footy, and he recommended people check it out. Also, Rosanna of AFL Obsessed just did a fantastic interview with Brian Barish, who is the media manager of the US AFL, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Both podcasts offer unique approaches and American perspectives to the game we all love. Who says Bombers, Cats, and Dogs fans can't get along, right? Finally, I just saw that American-Australian football star Mason Cox posting about a new podcast he is doing. Though I haven't had a chance to listen in yet, you can bet I will, and maybe you should too. So yes, footy is back soon, but here in the USA, it isn't always so easy to catch the games on TV. But if you don't have access to seeing the AFL beyond the few games Fox Sports shows, you are in luck. For a very limited time, while the games are still suspended, you can try out the Watch AFL app for just $2 a week or $5 a month. Though there are no new matches right now, you can watch any game you want from round 1, 2017 to now. Plus, you can watch a bunch of footy shows from this year, or even live stream the Fox Footy channel where there is all manner of shows, old matches, and much, much more. Of course, once the season starts again, the rates will increase to their usual rate, and it's around $30 a month if memory serves. Still well worth it, if you ask me. I'd give up my regular cable way before I'd lose my Watch AFL streaming service. Of course, the best way to get the Watch AFL app is through a way that I have discussed before. I personally get my AFL fix through my Western Bulldogs International membership, With it, I get the Watch AFL app, I become a club member, I get some really cool team membership goodies and a hat or a scarf, and it actually costs less than going through the Watch AFL app directly. I even renew it automatically every year. Couldn't be easier. I know some other teams also offer this membership option for fans overseas, and I'd be really surprised if all 18 didn't. I suggest giving the app a try with the crazy low price this month. Then, once you have a team you want to support, if you don't already have one, contact them directly for the membership. In the show notes, I will put a link to the Western Bulldogs International membership for your convenience if you choose to go for the red, white, and blue doggies, like I did. Okay, on to the main subject matter of this episode. I thought I would do something a little bit different today. With the AFL season due to start up again next month, I thought I would share some bits from here and there that I encountered when I first started following the Australian Football League. Basically questions that I had, or comments and questions others had when I shared AFL footy with them. Maybe something to help brand new fans when the action resumes. Most of these seem obvious, even silly now, but at the time, at the end of 2015, I knew virtually none of this. If you are a seasoned Aussie Rules fan, feel free to laugh at me and at my American family and friends who I've tried to drag down this fantastic AFL rabbit hole, and please forgive our ignorance. Many of us want to learn more about this amazing and awesome sport, and how are you going to learn if you don't ask questions, even stupid ones? So here, in no particular order, are some things that have come up in conversation during my footy journey. Question: so are you sure this isn't rugby? As I've said before, Americans almost always believe Australian football is the same as rugby. Maybe it's because several ex-AFL players have become NFL kickers and they're often referred to as rugby-style kickers. I don't know why. I've personally known Aussie rules and rugby were totally different since I was in my early teens when I read about the sport in a book. The different codes of rugby have a lot more in common with the NFL, actually, than Aussie rules. If you took away the constant stoppages and huddles, as well as the forward pass from American football, you'd almost have rugby league. And take away the downs, you're almost at rugby union. Australian rules football is a lot more like soccer, played by 36 NFL punters. And there's none of those silly red cards for contact. Or as my friend Rosanna calls it, Harry Potter Quidditch without the brooms. Question: why are the home and away teams listed in backwards order? In Australia, they put the home team first and or on top when listing who's playing. This is the reverse from the American custom of putting the visitors first. I'm not sure why it's done differently. One of the joys of following international sports, I guess. Hey, they also drive on the opposite side of the road, but somehow it works just fine. Question: why aren't there names on the jerseys? Well, first of all, in Australia, they're called Guernseys, not jerseys. Secondly, I don't know why the players' names are on there. Maybe so it doesn't clash with the advertising? Again, I'm not sure. Often, they will have the names on the warm-up shirts, but not the game Guernseys. I've heard it said that having the names on the back would make it a lot easier for people new to the game. And I get that. But I have to tell you, there is a certain amount of pride that comes with knowing your team so well that you can identify your players, even from afar, just by their running or kicking style. And besides, it's not like they cover up their heads with helmets. And the few who do wear the soft scrum caps, well, they are the easiest to identify of them all. Observation: everyone on the field is a lot taller in real life than what it seems on TV. And not just the rucks, those extra tall guys who go up for it when the umpire bounces the ball on the ground or throws it up in the air. I noticed this standing next to players when I traveled to Australia last year. I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm definitely not used to being the shortest guy in the photo. Comment: there is no blocking in Aussie rules. If you prevent a kick ball from going anywhere by using any part of your body, you actually smother it, not block it. And if you impede an opposing player so that your teammate can run past with the ball, you are shepherding. Now, if you shepherd another player too far away from the ball, that's actually holding, but still not blocking. Question: why is this one announcer talking backwards, like an Aussie Yoda? Well, you're probably talking about former Tiger great Matthew Richardson, or Richo, as he is affectionately called. He has a habit of sometimes stating the issue, then assigning the name associated with said issue after. For example, "They didn't need that, the doggies." Or, "Dominant performance, Dustin Martin." I'm not sure why he phrases some of his sentences like that, but he is one of my favorite sports announcers. And from everything I've heard, just about the nicest guy around, Richo. Oh, by the way, if you haven't heard it already, check out the song and video on YouTube called Richo by the band Picket Palace. The same guys who do the Anthony McDonald Tip and Woody Playing Footy song, by the way. I will post links to both in the show notes. Okay, question. Why are there so many whistles? And why don't they stop playing then? Well, they blow the whistle every time there is a mark to let everyone know not to tackle the guy with the ball. But play doesn't stop. Just the guy with the ball gets a free kick. These are usually pretty short whistles. Longer, more intense whistles usually indicate a rule infraction of some kind. Which brings us to comment. Hey, the referee is making calls backwards. First of all, due to Aussie Rules Football's association with cricket, the refs are called umpires, just like in baseball. And when the umpire says something like holding Bulldogs, it is actually not the Bulldogs who broke the rules. The ump is just stating the infraction, followed by who gets the free kick. It's the opposite of when an NFL or NHL referee calls a penalty and then names a team. Here the team named is the one who made the infraction and is getting the subsequent penalty. Growing up with American sports, this aspect of Aussie rules takes a bit of getting used to. Question: what is a falcon? Or at least how does it pertain to Aussie rules? Basically, it's getting hit in the head with the ball. It could be during a marking contest, and the Fox Footy Show Bounce often highlights the best falcons of the week. But the most spectacular falcons are the ones to the face right off the boot. The sweat will spray like a slow-motion fight scene in a Rocky movie, and sometimes a player even gets knocked out cold. It can be a bit scary, especially if it involves the eye. Fortunately, this appears to be rare, and most times the announcers will just crack a joke about the player having the word Sharon imprinted across their forehead. Speaking of the word spray, in Australia, a spray means getting yelled at, often by a coach or captain. If some saliva happens to accent the words, well, then that's even more apt. And on the field, a sledge is less a hammering tool and more a vicious insult, often quite clever in design and usually issued during a game to rattle your opponent. A good time is when he or she is lining up for a set shot at the goal. Anyone remember the movie Basketball? It's kind of like that. Okay, next. Question: why are the coaches not on the sideline with the teams? Okay, it's actually called the boundary line, not sideline, and the coaches are usually in the coach's box up on high. Definitely a bit different from any other sports, but once you realize just how large a footy field is, you understand why coach wants a better vantage point. Speaking of coaches, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but when I started watching AFL, I couldn't remember which team Coach Scott was affiliated with. I was closely studying every game I could see, 2 or 3 a week, to learn as much as I could about this awesome new sport. And it was really bothering me why I couldn't remember if it was the Cats or the Kangaroos. I knew it was a blue and white colored team, but why did I always think it was the other one of the two? It took me a season and a half, no joke, a match between Geelong and North Melbourne, and a side-by-side split shot of 2 coaches to make me realize that the twins, Chris Scott and Bradley Scott, were in fact 2 different people at 2 different blue and white striped teams. It matters less now, since Bradley Scott is no longer with North, but it's something I wish I had figured out sooner. Oh well, I never claimed I was all that smart. Moving on. Comment. The meaning of the word average is different in Australia than in the United States. In America, in common usage, average means something like somewhere in the middle, not the best, not the worst. It seems to me that in Australia, average means pretty bad, as in an average effort is not something you'd be proud of, as in my ability to differentiate between twins is pretty average. Also, the phrase not ideal is far worse than it sounds. Question. What's with the out of bounds rules? Or more precisely, how is the ball brought back into play? It took me a little bit to understand why sometimes the umpire would throw it back in, backwards, and sometimes a player from one team would kick it in. Now I know, of course, that if it touches the ground after being kicked, then the boundary umpire gets to work. And if it doesn't touch the ground, it's called out on the full, and the team that didn't kick it out gets to bring it back in. Simple, but for some reason it took me a few matches to understand this. Question. There's only 18 teams in the AFL? Well, yes, doesn't seem like a lot, does it? Not when compared to various American leagues, for sure. But when you consider the population of the United States is about 13 times larger than Australia's, 18 teams is actually much more per capita. Follow-up question. Half the teams are in just one city? Well, I cover this in more detail in episode 3 of this podcast, but yes, actually more than half the teams are clustered around Melbourne. The game was invented and nurtured here for over 100 years. In fact, it was initially called Melbourne Rules Football, then Victorian Rules Football. And the intense interstate rivalry between Victoria and New South Wales would explain why rugby grew in and around Sydney instead of Aussie Rules Football. Try as the league may, fans really don't want their beloved team to move across the country. So to have a club that has been around for a century, since when it was a state league competition, suddenly pack up and move is a big ask. Still, a few teams did move out of Melbourne for distant lands. The Swans moved to Sydney from South Melbourne in 1982, and the Fitzroy Lions moved to and merged with the Brisbane Bears in 1996. This, coupled with teams springing up in Western Australia and South Australia that wanted to join the competition, is why the Victorian Football League, just relatively recently, in 1990, became the Australian Football League. Okay, follow-up to the follow-up question. Since the Victorian Football League became the Australian Football League, why do I sometimes see the VFL mentioned today? Okay, I will probably delve much deeper into this on a future episode of the podcast, but let me try to quickly explain. In 1877, the Victorian Football Association, or VFA, was formed and became the premier Australian Football League. For 20 years, things were going pretty good, but then in 1897, about half the teams succeeded and formed the Victorian Football League, or VFL. This is the league that grew into the Australian Football League we know and love today. But the VFA remained, sort of becoming a minor league to the VFL/AFL over 100 years or so. To add to the confusion, in 1996, just 6 years after the VFL changed its name to the AFL, the VFA changed its name to the Victorian Football League. So basically, today the VFL is a Victorian state league which also serves as a minor league development league for several Melbourne-based AFL teams. As a side note, other Australian states have similar leagues, like South Australia's South Australian National Football League, or SANFL. The states of New South Wales and Queensland share the North East Australian Football League, also called the NEFL. Western Australia has the West Australian Football League, or the deliciously sounding WAFL. Even Tasmania and the Northern Territory have state-level leagues despite not having AFL teams currently. The Tasmanian State League, or TSL, and the Northern Territory Football League, or NTFL, respectively. Interestingly, the NTFL plays footy during the summer due to it being the rainy season, and apparently You can't play cricket in the rain. Okay, back to the list of silly conversations I have had about Aussie rules. Question: what the heck is the Barassi Line? Well, it sorta is Australia's sporting Mason-Dixon line. If you draw a straight line across the map from where Queensland meets the Northern Territory on Australia's north coast to where New South Wales meets Victoria on the southeast coast, it is a pretty rough estimate. People on the east and north of this line, which is a much smaller area of Australia but more densely populated, are thought to be rugby fanatics, while the folks on the other larger side are Aussie rules fans. This imaginary line was first used in 1978 by historian Ian Turner when all the National Rugby League teams were on one side and all the VFL teams on the other. The Melbourne Storm Rugby League team and the 4 AFL teams of today would seem to smudge the line somewhat, though I do believe it still holds some validity today as far as TV ratings and attendance goes. Comment: those shorts are so short. Oh man, not this again. Well, yes, they are short, but I know some ladies who sure don't seem to mind it one little bit. And you should check out some footage from the 1970s and 80s. As the mullets grew longer, the shorts went in the opposite direction. Lieutenant Dangle from Reno 911 comes to mind. Minus the hairstyle, of course. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this silly trip down memory lane. These days I seem to forget more and more, so I guess it's therapeutic. I would be forever grateful if you would be kind enough to share a link to this podcast with your friends and family, whether they are new to this awesome game of Aussie rules football or not. I would also love to hear your questions and suggestions. It means the world to me when people comment on these things. I see the download numbers, not huge, but it's still fairly steady, and I love that people are listening. But that personal touch of people caring enough to be reaching out is truly wonderful. Maybe you have an idea for a future episode. Please let me hear all about it. You can reach me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Stray Dog Footy, and by email at straydogfooty@yahoo.com. Just wanted to quickly mention that I am not endorsed by or officially affiliated with either the Australian Football League or the Western Bulldogs, beyond being a huge fan and supporter. Likewise, I am not endorsed by or affiliated with Peg and the Rejected, but I am a fan of their music. I would like to thank them for the use of their song, Red, White, Black and Blue, which I used a portion of as an intro to this episode. I will also play us out to their entire song, and of course, leave a link in the show notes to their music. Take care, and while we wait for June 11th to approach, seemingly with the speed of a glacier, go check out those Picket Palace videos. In the meantime, here's Peg and the Rejected with Red, White, Black and Blue. Cheers.
1, 2, 3, 4. Stare at the sun till we can't see anymore. The yellow belly of executive page. target